What's going on, guys, and welcome to today's episode of Oh My God, the internet is going to kill me for this. I'm not kidding when I say that I've been thinking about this video for weeks, but I wanted to make sure that I came with some well-constructed arguments in responses to Rick Beato's video. If you haven't seen them yet, I would really recommend that you watch his How Do Computers Kill Rock Music and Jump On and Quantize videos after this video, of course. He does a great job breaking down in very simple to understand language the effect that computer editing and programming has had on so many genres and specifically rock music. One of the main things that he does is taking a John Bonham performance and cutting it and really making it like mathematically perfect. And I can definitely say as a drummer, musician, and like having John Bonham be my first idol as a drummer ever, this is definitely sacrilegious, and I cannot agree more that quantizing has destroyed the way that drummers and musicians and singers feel in a song. But the main video I want to talk about today is this one where Rick says this.
So if people wonder why rock has completely died in popularity, it happened in the early 2000s. And it's because of Beat Detective and Auto-Tune and a bunch of producers that were honestly too lazy to get people to play their parts together.
And while I do agree, I don't think it paints the whole picture. And if we have to assign blame, I think that it goes much further than just the producer. When a band is creating a record, there are several entities that may or may not be involved in the creativity to some extent. We of course have the band, the artist, the musicians, we have the producer, we have the band's manager, and we have the label. And although this norm has changed, I'm specifically looking at the early 2000s because this was the era that Rick was talking about, where this very formal way of doing business was still very much intact. And when looking at a producer's role, they're very simply hired to oversee and manage the creative end and the sound recording of a project. Some are more hands-off depending upon the situation in the band, but it can include all kinds of things from choosing the gear, to crafting the tones, to engineering itself, to arguably the most important part and fundamental piece of producing, which is coaching and inspiring great performances from musicians. But with the wide availability of being able to edit somebody's performance, really starting in the early 2000s, I imagine a lot of sessions went like this. All right, here we go, last line. Da, 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 oh, and da. Was that good? Yeah, give me 1 second. Let me just 1 second really quick. Okay, just let me know because I have better things to do than being a talented singer. Hey, can you stay late tonight editing? And as a producer myself, I can really resonate with how important it is that it really comes onto my shoulders if the project is good or not, because I'm the person that's in charge of saying, yes, that take was good, that take was bad, redo it like this, try singing in this manner, why don't you try thinking about this when you sing this part of the song? That's all falls on the producer's shoulders. So yes, they are to blame for that. But there's very much more to it than just blaming the producer. And I don't want this to be a whataboutism kind of argument, which is when you just maybe somebody brings up a point and then you say, oh, well, what about that? So you just want to be playing the producers, but like, well, what about artists and labels? And I'm not trying to dismiss what producers are doing, but instead of pointing at the other people, I would like to bring them into the kind of gumbo of blame that we're creating here. First, let's invite artists in, and to do so, we have to look at kind of an overgeneralized arc of rock music and the core values that made it such an important part of the 1900s. Traditionally, rock music has been about rebellion, being against the man, individuality, and self-expression in a very raw, in-your-face way. Their fierce desire to speak out, be loud, and metaphorically knock people over is initially what attracted young generations to rock music. It was a controversial genre all the way back from like Elvis shaking his hips and people worrying that he was ruining the youth of the time, and it continued with that through the generations, always pushing the boundaries of what that genre was possible of doing and keeping it fresh and exciting and engaging, and continually creating more subgenres and more sub-movements within the umbrella of rock. And fast forward to the early 2000s, and we're looking at a very different situation, because now we have this genre that's been in different forms in the charts for so long that labels are just now very focused on making as much money as possible with as little investment as possible, as efficiently and fast as possible. And I hate when people say like, oh, this band sold out, you know, they're just doing it for the money. I think more than a band or specific situation doing it, the entire industry, in a sense, sold out to the technology, and it became much more corporatized and profit-focused because they had the opportunity to do so with things like Auto-Tune and Beat Detective. And that's when I'd like to invite the music labels into our blame gumbo. A label's job at the end of the day is to sell music for more dollars in total than it took to make it, and they saw an opportunity to lower the cost it took to make a record. And on top of that, rock was incredibly popular at the time and all over the charts in the early 2000s, so they wanted to capitalize on this trend as much as possible, as fast as possible, and as cheap as possible, and technology is what allowed that to happen. Why bother hiring a producer for way longer time to put in all this individual specific work with these artists to get a similar product? I'm not saying it's, you know, as good as the recorded stuff. I prefer music that sounds like humans too, but why go that route when it's like so much more expensive when you can just kind of have them half-ass it, then have the editor clean up the rest and save a ton of money. And while I don't agree with that sentiment, if I look at it from a purely unemotional financial standpoint, like, I get it. At the end of the day, the average music listener isn't able to discern the difference of what's happening, and if the product is selling, and the labels are saving money by doing it a certain way, there's no incentive to go back to an old era of creating music and product that's so much more expensive if people are still enjoying it. So there's really just, at the end of the day, no incentive on a financial end to do so, and that's what labels care about. And I want to also throw in the caveat that not every label in every situation is gonna be super money focused, but overarchingly, there's a massive, massive difference in the amount of work that it takes to put that producer in the room for 2 months, as opposed to cut the time in half, cut the time in a third, hire editors to clean up the rest. It just makes sense from that business standpoint, and if they're not seeing any loss in consumption, why not? So yeah, labels are partially to blame for this way of creating, but more than even the labels is the money. Because you need the money in order to fund the studio, the engineer, the producer, the band, the editors, the mixers, the marketing. But the money is what incentivizes people to make different decisions about how art is created. And that is ultimately the core of the issue here. And at the end of the day, a producer that recommends that they spend 6 more weeks on a project, that's probably gonna be turned down by the label. There's no incentive for them to say yes to that. So as much as somebody can request it, I could even see myself personally as a producer in that situation, just saying, you know what, I'll do the best that I can. This is what we got. You know, I'm gonna take the gig because it's a good gig, and we're just gonna do it. And as much as I think a lot of people like to say that, oh no, I'm in it for the art, I think that it would be a very different situation being in that circumstance than it looks from the outside. So while I might like to think I'm all about the art and the integrity and making the best thing possible, money changes people. That's just how it's always been. So yeah, it's hard to know how you would also act in that situation if the label says, yeah, we're not gonna pay you this anymore, we're gonna give you this, and we're gonna give you a quarter of the time, and take it or leave it. I'd probably take it, I'd be honest. I'd probably become part of the problem. And that loops me back to the artists themselves, because for a genre that's based around rebellion, speaking out, and individuality, they are the ones that also were completely complacent and allowed the humanity to be removed from their music. And I can also understand that sometimes the record label has more creative say than the band does, depending on the record label agreement that they have. But overall, the entire lump of musicians that were on the charts all in essence allowed this to happen, or at least complacent enough to not speak out enough against it to try to trigger a movement. And now I know I could be wrong about this, so if I am, somebody comment down below and let me know, because as far as I know and far as what I've seen, I haven't found like an article from 2003 where like Nickelback is just saying how they hate their record. And that's kind of the difficult part of this, because you can't go publicly smash the music you made and put out, because that's not gonna reflect poorly. So it's this really kind of vicious circle that is all tied into the money aspect of it. But after a couple years, and when this became the norm, artists and producers kept accepting the work, kept accepting the contracts, and full knowing what was going to be happening to the recordings, and they just kind of allowed it. But the artists and the producers both accepted their album advances and their production rates for the stuff that was gonna happen, and after a few years, they had to know all the things that were gonna be chopped and screwed around with their songs, but they accepted the terms and they went through with it. So kind of being guilty by participation, where I can't specifically say, like, Nickelback, you're terrible, but they did kind of participate in the change. And all this comes together to create a generation that's looking towards squeezing budgets and efficiency over creating the best art possible with the artists and musicians. And at the end of the day, the creatives became complacent to the new status quo and just gave in instead of sticking to their rebellion rock roots. And I think that ultimately, combined with the producers, the labels, all the external factors, brought us to the death of rock music. And that's why I wanted to bring all of this up, because I do agree with Rick that producers do deserve blame, but I think they deserve blame, and everybody else for letting all of this happen collectively deserves the blame. And to go even more macro with the entire situation, this is actually a pretty predictable change that I'm sure we'll see in the future as technology advances. I think about it this way. Humans caused this, not the technology itself. Historically, when it comes to making a profit, businesses and individuals are always looking for an easier, faster, cheaper way to do it, and the only reason that they aren't doing something more is because the technology hasn't allowed it. This was definitely the case when it came to things like the Industrial Revolution, assembly line manufacturing, and now technology and music. These are all new creations, new advances in technology that have allowed us to cut corners or to do something faster and easier than ever thought possible before. And I undoubtedly know that if there's a plugin that will just allow somebody to type in the words, which I know it's out there, but it's not very good yet. But if the plugin gets to the point where you can have a vocal that sounds 90 to 95% like a real human voice singing, that people will use that and make hits with completely robotic voices. And that's not a knock against humanity. That's just by nature. If I can sit here in 30 minutes, make a killer lead vocal, like that would be amazing. And I'm probably gonna do that instead of me singing for 8 to 12 to 16 hours. So it's all about the fact that the technology and what it is able to do is then what will push as far as what corners we're going to be able to cut. So kind of the unfortunate moral that comes through all of this is that humans are always going to take advantage of the technology that's available to them if it can benefit them in the sense of time, ease, and money. And that is just inherently how it's always going to be. And if you want to, I've been thinking about making a video talking about the actual good things that all this technology has brought, because it's been a lot of negativity, a lot of like money hungry people are bad, but I want to make a video kind of in defense of auto-tune, beat detective, programming, and all things like that. So if you're interested in seeing that video, interested in hearing me trying to defend one of the most hated plugins ever created in the industry, let me know in the comments below. Probably gonna do it anyways though, but I would like to know if people are excited to see that. So who do you see as the culprit for roboticizing music? Is it the producer's fault because they're hired to manage the creative and ultimately it should fall on their shoulders? Or do you think that it collectively falls on everybody for letting it happen, for letting the money incentivize the creative decisions of the artists? Or is it somewhere in between? Let me know in the comments down below. Thank you so much for checking out this video, but don't go away just yet because there's a video in the top right corner that I know you're going to love. Very similar stuff to this, lots of good information and good insight that hopefully will give you a different perspective on stuff when it comes to the music industry and freelancing overall. Other than that, I don't know how much time I have left, so I'm just gonna say peace, I love you, have a great day.